This is section 2.4, applications of linear equations. This is part 2. We've just talked through the 6 basic steps of solving a word problem. And now we're going to talk about our first type of word problem. I said that if we can identify a type, then we will have a strategy for getting it done. The first type that I talk about are what I call translation problems. These are arguably the most important type of word problem because they often occur within other types. So eventually we are going to learn a type of word problem, but within that word problem, we're also going to have to translate something, okay? So, and I use the word translate because we're going to make the same approach to these as you would in a foreign language class. We're going to translate the word problems word for word into math language from English language. Then we're going to apply the math grammar. And what I mean by that is in a foreign language, we have rules about what order our words go in order to make sense in the language. And in math, we also have grammar, specific ways we write things, okay? So let's look at a problem, a translation problem. The first two we're going to work are not exactly real-world problems. They are just algebra problems written in words, okay? So let's look at this first one. 12 less than 1/3 of a number is -6. Find the number. Okay, so let's look at this word for word. 12 is, of course, 12. Less than implies subtraction. Now with subtraction, every time we have a translation problem with a subtraction, this can be confusing. We'll talk about how to figure it out and what makes it confusing in just a second. Okay? 1/3 is, of course, the number 1/3. Now the word of. We talked a bit about this in one of the review lectures, but the word of often means multiplication. Sometimes, because these problems are written in English, of is actually just the English word of, but it often implies multiplication, and it can be a little bit confusing, but it's something you'll get a better feel for the more problems you work. Okay. So I have 12 less than 1/3 multiplication of a number. Well, that's what we're looking for, so let's call that x, is equals -6. Okay, so we have basic translation. Now we need to make sure we get the order correct, okay, get the grammar right. First of all, 1/3 times x, we don't normally, write a multiplication sign between a number and what it's multiplied by. So I'm going to call 1/3 multiplied by x, that's the same thing as 1/3 x. So that part is better written as this in grammar, in math grammar. Okay, so now why do I call subtraction confusing? And it has everything to do with the English language. What you have to think about every time is whether or not, what order the subtraction is going in. Do I need to write 12 minus 1/3 x? Or do I need to write 1/3 x minus 12? It makes a huge difference in the problem, okay? In fact, every time you have a subtraction in a word problem, you really, really, really need to think about whether or not your answer makes sense. If it doesn't make sense in the end, the order of subtraction should be the first thing you double check. Now, how do we decide? The easiest way is for us to think about money. We are really good with money. We have a good gut understanding of what money means. So let me reword this, and I'm going to use the same pattern. I'm just going to change it to money. You make $12 less than $12 less than, instead of just saying 1/3 of a number, let's just say me. You make $12 less than me. Now, if I wanted to figure out what this meant, do I take your $12 and subtract what I make to find out what you make? Or do I take 12 minus what I make, or do I take what I make and subtract $12 to find what you make? Okay. Well, if I want to find out what you make, I would take what I make. Let's just call this star right now. I would take what I make and then subtract $12 to find out what you make, right? Well, the same thing's happening here. 12 less than me, 12 less than this. Me minus 12, 1/3 x minus 12 is how this should be. And that equals -6. This is what I mean by the setup being the most difficult. Okay, so we've read through it, kind of understood what we were supposed to do. We assigned a variable right here. We set up an equation. Now we need to solve this. Okay, so we have a fraction in it, and if we want to clear the fraction, what we do is we look for the LCD. We only have one fraction, so our LCD is easy to figure out. Our LCD is going to be 3 because that's the only denominator I have. Now remember, what we do is we multiply every single thing by our LCD. If it's by just a regular number, I'll write 3. If it's by a fraction, I'll write 3 over 1. So 3 over 1 times 1/3 x minus 3 times 12 equals 3 times -6. Here, these cancel out. These were reciprocals, so I get simply x minus 36 equal to -18. Now, to keep solving this, I need the x alone, which means I need to move the 36 over to the right. This is a minus, so I add 36 to both sides. And that gives me x equals 18. Okay? All right, so we've solved the equation. Now we need to look to see if we've answered the question. We were asked to find the number. X was the number. We found x, so this is what we were looking for. We have answered the question. Now, is it reasonable? Like I said, this isn't much of a real-world question. We're asked to find a number, we got a number. If we didn't get boxes or stars or flowers, we got a number, so it makes sense. Okay, continuing in the next part.